So what's the context for this meeting? The context is there's a strong recognition of the value of nature-based solutions for climate change adaptation. And essentially NBS is about finding ways to solve societal challenges by working with the natural environment rather than fighting against it. It encompasses a wide range of things, from the construction of green roofs to the protection of wetlands. In some cases, it's about new technologies. In many cases, it's about using well-established techniques. In some cases, relearning previous techniques. Now, done right, NBS can be cheaper and more flexible than just relying upon grey infrastructure. And NBS can also yield a range of co-benefits. But the situation is that we are nowhere near to realizing this potential. There's a growing number of inspiring examples, many of which will be featured today, but these still remain the exception rather than the norm. So, there's an urgent need to remove barriers to NBS. And so that's the motivation for this workshop, which has been undertaken as part of a collaboration with the government of Hungary, with financial support from the EU. I'm looking forward to a great discussion about how we can make progress in 3 key areas: capacity, governance, and finance. So with that, I would like to open the workshop and welcome Leticia Lopez-Treya from the DG Reform to make some welcoming remarks. Leticia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. Dear ladies and gentlemen, representatives from the Hungarian Ministry for Innovation and Technology, the OECD team, the international experts and participants. It is a big honor for me to represent today the European Commission at this workshop on scaling up the implementation of nature-based solutions to share good practices and experiences. On behalf of the Directorate General for Structural Reform Support of the European Commission, I would like to welcome all the participants to this workshop. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to get acquainted with DG Reform, please allow me to say a few words about our work. DG Reform supports member states' authorities to implement growth-enhancing reforms through tailor-made technical expertise. The support can cover any phase in the reform process, from preparation and design to development and implementation of the reforms. We engage with the member states on their requests in key reform areas. These are very wide-ranging and include in the area of sustainability, just transition, climate adaptation, and climate mitigation. Drawing on this experience, we are providing technical support to Hungary to strengthen the enabling environment for the implementation and promotion of nature-based solutions. Climate change has significant impacts on the environment, affecting our society and economies at both local and global level. Climate mitigation efforts will not be enough to prevent extreme weather events that are already occurring. In this context, climate adaptation, specifically the implementation and scaling up of nature-based solutions, is of utmost importance to build more resilient societies, economies, and ecosystems. This project is very important for Hungary, as it is for the European Commission. It is very timely and well aligned with a number of European Commission priorities, such as the EU Green Deal, the Climate Adaptation Strategy, and the EU Biodiversity Strategy, to name a few. This event presents an excellent opportunity to share good practices and experiences on the implementation of nature-based solutions and share how to overcome the main barriers. The discussions today will be very important for the development of the project's outputs. To conclude, I would like to thank the international experts speaking at the different sessions today, as well as the participants already. I wish you a very fruitful workshop, and I'm looking forward to interesting presentations and discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leticia, for those kind words and useful context for the discussion. So look, before we move into the first session, I'd first like to invite all of you to participate in an online poll, which should be imminently popping up on your screens. Okay, we'll just give another 30 seconds for any final answers to come in. Okay, so hopefully you all can see the poll results up ahead of you. And I think, I think what's interesting here is and again, in a sense, it was the guiding principle of this workshop, was that it's not about one single thing that's preventing the use of NBS. Rather, it's about a number of issues that need to be tackled in a cohesive way, with the regulatory framework coming up pretty high with 50%, but also looking at technical capacity, funding, and getting the interest and the institutional arrangements lined up. And it looks also like we have pretty much equal interest for each of the sessions that's going to be following up in terms of looking at the capacity, the regulation, the cooperation, and the financing models for NBS. So with thanks for that, I'd like to move us into the first substantive session, which is a deep dive into Hungary's experience with scaling up the use of NBS. For this item, I'm pleased to introduce Noemi Dalnaki, who is head of unit from the Ministry of Innovation and Technology in Hungary. I think more importantly, I'd like to emphasize that Noemi is an energetic champion for the use of NBS, and very, very much looking forward to hearing her reflections on both the progress that's been made and the work that remains to be done. With that, Noemi, over to you.
Thank you, Michael, and I'm very happy that so many of you are participating today in this meeting. I will try to share my screen. I hope it will work out. Let me know, please, if it's full screen or not.
No,
No? Okay. Just a second. What do you see now?
Perfect.
It's perfect. Okay. Before I start, because my presentation is perhaps a bit boring regarding the texting, but before I start, I would like to thank to the OECD, the Hungarian experts who participated, my team, obviously, and DG Reform as well. And what I would like to highlight before going into details and speaking about what we did in this project and what we are going to do in this project, I would like to reflect on the various direct EU funding and NBS. Personally, I had the chance to look in the Horizon working plans for 23 and 24. And I have seen that NBS is present there. Life is underpinning NBS. Also, it was not called NBS for a long time. And as you can see, TSI, the Technical Support Instrument, the project, our project was supported from TSI, is also open to such projects, and obviously Interreg as well. And perhaps you know that the direct EU funding is not always destined to the European member states, European Union member states, but many others can participate, especially in Horizon calls. And my kind of dream would be to be able to continue this work launched within the TSI instrument, with an Interreg, and then to go on with Life and Horizon type projects as well, because there are so many issues that can be covered in these direct EU funding possibilities, that it's worth to go on and keep an eye on calls for projects in the future. So I advise you, on one hand, I would advise DG Reform and OECD as well, since they are very big institutions, to liaise with each other and to talk to each other concerning these different funding systems, because this would help a lot to member states as well. In this project, we have seen that there is so many, lots of knowledge, many people interested in different fields and on different governance levels, and we have plenty of information. Yesterday, there was a workshop of the standardization community, CEN, and we just say CENELET, but this is in Hungarian, the abbreviation. So the standardization authority from the EU. And they were also dealing with the standardization of NBS. And so in many countries and many scenes, lots of things are happening around NBS. So there is a need to coordinate and to avoid duplication and to avoid, well, yeah, we shouldn't double our work. Okay, so what Hungary did. First of all, we are the team planning one of the operational programs in Hungary, which means that we are planning lots of money and we had the opportunity, the chance to introduce NBS and green infrastructure in basically all the priorities of our operational program that is dealing with environment and energy. Perhaps you are aware that the EU distributes via regional and cohesion policy large amounts for different developments. And this green infrastructure or NBS type investments are a bit new to all of us, and also for Hungary. We have some good examples, but there is really room to develop it. So when we saw that this is something, this is an area where the toddlers are, doing their first steps, we told we have to support this somehow. So what about going for an SRSP project? It was called SRSP at that time, Structural Reform Program. Now it's called TSI. So we submitted this project to the EU. We didn't have strong backing from the government that time, and there were other priorities which were more supported, but it was important for the EU. And the EU acknowledged the importance of this, and we got the money for that project, and the OECD was selected to develop the project. And we have two main partners in Hungary in this project, the Ministry of Finance and the Prime Minister's Office. But obviously there are many line departments taking part and line policy departments taking part in this project who are important for NBS. And this is the difficulty and also the beauty of this nature-based solutions. Okay. Then here are the partners. I don't, yeah. Then for the project objectives, I don't know if you see the slide on the project objectives now. Yes, okay, good. For the project objectives, we thought that it is important to have a look on the governance, legislation, how we could incorporate NBS to a larger extent in Hungary. So we made a thorough analysis with Hungarian experts, revised by the OECD experts, I mean the OECD team. And they were not only looking on construction and spatial planning and so on, but also on sectoral policies, because there are policies that have a say in developing NBS, depending, in fact, NBS depends on these sectors, like how is flood management policy established or water management policy established. This is very important. And then there are sectors benefiting, like health. They do not, they cannot really influence, I mean, directly the development of NBS, but can make very good benefits. And you feel this also in your budget. I mean, the central budget when you are planning your healthcare expenses, obviously. So, and we told, obviously we need trainings. We would like to make a website, but TSI is not financing infrastructure, only paperwork. So we told, okay, then let's have the content at least, and some guidelines to municipalities, because big municipalities have the knowledge usually and are open and have the resources to open up to NBS, but small municipalities don't have anything, in fact, and they don't have the capacity, they don't have the knowledge, they don't know how to get help and so on. So the smaller a municipality, the more difficult to involve them in NBS. And what we made, we started with really establishing a very big community, a group of stakeholders. We have on our list about 150-200 persons, and we see the importance of disseminating the information. There is lots of interest, what we see, and we also established the steering committee with the most important policy fields. Who are deciding on the future. And we would like to keep this after the project as well, because this can be very helpful when you try to develop legislation, you introduce this NBS stuff in any of your line policies. Okay, we had two kickoff meetings, an informal one and a formal one. What we did is that we were not only talking about the project, but we were involving ongoing projects, other universities, and everything that we could find on the Hungarian market. So we tried to make it fruitful and interesting for the others. And we had a huge number of participants, because we had 150 people at each kickoff and at each of our meetings. We made a questionnaire as well. We have sent out the questionnaire to the different players of the governance, like municipalities, public authorities, and so on, permitting authorities. And we had a workshop for Hungarians, basically. We can send you later we have the links. We put everything on a Google Drive. It's in Hungarian, sorry, but some of the information is also in English. And yes, well, we have these are the and we have some work left. This is what you can see here. We finished with outputs 1, 2, 3, and 5, which was about legislation governance, the state of play in Hungary, and also the financing part of NBS. If you want to do something, I can give you two advices. One, you need company. The second is that if you want to do something, it's very important that the legislative part and the financial part are together, and they are not destroying each other. So this is really difficult to manage. We have the chance now because of developing the programming and so on. So we are in a lucky situation. And what we are still doing is that we would like to assess what universities are teaching on NBS, and not only for landscape architects and so on, but also in other cases like engineering, water engineering, whatever. This is one thing. And we hope that later on there will be a horizon call to develop university curricula for NBS. So we are very keen on participating in a Horizon project like that. And we would like to develop the website content as well. So these are upcoming tasks. We have funding in different operational programs for green infrastructure and blue infrastructure. We don't call it in our programs NBS. We mention the term, but really it refers usually to green infrastructure. We have also a big amount for municipalities, but it allows for gray infrastructure as well. And since the regulatory background is rather about gray, municipalities are still opting for gray in most of the cases. So there is a lot to be done in the future for greening. And not that gray is bad, because sometimes you really need gray, but there is really room for doing some green infrastructure in the future. As I mentioned, our operational program, the second one, with a smaller amount, but we will not allow for green, only in up to 10–20% within a project. We will really try to be as green as possible. And we also have the Common Agricultural Policy, where greening is allowed, which can be also very important. And some other operational programs also give this option, but as an ancillary facility or an ancillary possibility, like the transport operational program, where you can also do some greening. And we see that some background institutions are really willing to do that. There was a committee established for sustainability in transport, which is a great step towards NBS as well. I listed the EU programs as I have started with, but I will not repeat. And a few words about the results of the projects, of our project. Obviously, we have similar problems with climate as you do, heat waves, wind and snowstorms. We have drought, flooding, and in some cases, in some areas, worsening air quality. But this is not linked to climate change. It's because of energy poverty and burning waste and so on. But obviously we can improve air quality with noise as well with green infrastructure. In the thinking of the designers, we don't see yet it's strengthening, but we don't see yet this green approach. It is also because the maintenance of green is more expensive than the maintenance of gray. But we have the typical problems like heat island, also some flash floods and air quality in big cities and in smaller cities as well, depending on the location. So we promote NBS in different strategies, but usually our experience is that these strategies are not that powerful. A biodiversity strategy, a climate strategy is a nice thing, but it is now that it really starts to get serious, I would say. Also with this Ukrainian crisis for energy, even if we are talking about climate crisis and biodiversity crisis, it will take time for mankind to realize how big the problem is. And what we see is that implementation, even if we have some strategies, implementation is really lagging at municipal level. And I am talking today rather about urban and municipal NBS, because we have a well-established policy department and state secretariat, in fact, for nature and biodiversity outside inhabited areas. Now, what we got, the recommendations, it seems quite general. If you want to have the full list, we can send it to you. This can be used in many other countries, I guess. It is very important to have a definition that is used by all of us. This is the first step. Then it is good to have it in the public procurement rules, but green public procurement has, well, it's leaking from many, it has many problems legally. Because on one hand, you have to respect the competition, on the other hand, so you cannot restrain and so on. You cannot put constraints to competition. On the other hand, you want to green, and it is not straightforward, I would say, for green infrastructure and greening and green public procurement. Stakeholder engagement is essential. What I can tell is it doesn't matter who cares or who is responsible within a public administration for this type of investments. The most important is that they are active, and they have a small team, and they are really keeping an eye on what's going on internationally, to have information about different workshops, to develop this policy field, and so on and so on. And in this way, you can go on this road. Then, obviously, we will have to align and coordinate policies across different ministries. And as I told you, a steering committee can be good for such work. Then, for the regulation, we will have to strengthen the development framework, both at county and municipal level. The larger a municipality is, the better it can be, in fact, in NBS, but such municipalities should help smaller ones. So it's not just lár to have, the knowledge, but it is important that you develop your system in a way where you can assist smaller municipalities with your knowledge. We have to revise regulations, and in fact, in many aspects, but what we saw at hotspots was water retention is really, really important. And also how we approach this issue in the built environment. And then, yeah, obviously you need some regulatory instruments to incentivize. As I told you, it is not enough to have financial incentives. You also have to have some regulatory incentives. And I would say you also have to have sanctions, because it is not only enough to tease, it's not enough to tease the participants. You also have to have some sanctioning if possible, because this can make a good balance when you want to introduce something new. We had obviously some recommendations on capacity building to create a one-stop shop for municipalities. And since there are so many line departments and policies involved, like, disaster management, water management, public water utilities, transport also is very important, where the water flows from the road. This is very important. And on biodiversity, you also have ecologists and so on. So you don't have one solution fits all, and this is especially true for NBS. It is really, really wide ranging. So you need to coordinate all these line departments and policy people, and in the same time to set some kind of standards on what you would like to achieve and how you would like to do it. And each country has its own situation, problems, regulatory system, and so on. So it's not straightforward either. On financing, we got the recommendation to examine the Common Agricultural Policy eligibility criteria. In fact, this is changing now, and this was changed by the EU, fortunately, so there will be more funding for greening, and we hope that this will help. And the other one was the leverage of local funding sources, because we see that it is not enough to rely on the state or on the central budget or on public finance. You will have to involve private people, private investors, and it is also very important for maintenance, because for a small NBS, it is really easy to maintain it with the public. So a small community, like if you have a community for composting or anything else that is close to NBS, these communities can be used for maintaining smaller solutions. If you have bigger solutions, you obviously will need the support of the municipality, of the state, or bigger private investor. But perhaps you know that most of the companies are doing CSRs. They are interested in such solutions as well, because they can put it on their flag that they are green. So, and the third one that was mentioned here is to develop the culture of maintenance. In Eastern and Central Europe, maintenance culture is not as in Western Europe, I would say, and in other countries. It very much depends on the part of the world where you live. We usually don't like to maintain, or don't like to maintain too much, but we like to make something new. But maintenance is very, very important in this in this respect, because you can do lots of damage. And just to show you a few problems in Hungary, in a few cities, we have in certain cases drought, in certain cases flood. You can see this everywhere else in many countries. And some solutions that are perhaps well known. I put a Hungarian for the villages. I can recommend it to you. It's really good, this project, and it can be replicated or multiplicated in several other countries. They have a website, and I also put some information. You can find, well, it's from the bottom, the third one. This is this Hungarian project. It's small-scale water retention developed with WWF, World Wide Foundation. And you can also find information in English about the project. So I hope that this will be useful for you. And thanks again for coming to this international workshop. And we are obviously open to any further collaboration with other countries as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Noemi. So look, before we move on to the next item, I just want to briefly open the floor in case there are any questions. If you have a question on your mind, do just use the hand function, or type it in the chat. Okay, I see Mr. Actus, if I'm not mistaken. Please, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would introduce myself. My name is Cem Aktus. I am from Turkey, and I am working for Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. And I would know about the agriculture sector with this project. My question is, Mrs. Balcony, for their project, what kind of implementations did they do in agriculture sector in your project? Yes, that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Noemi, please.
Yeah. In fact, the project was not really about agriculture, because agriculture is a well-established policy and sector for ages, but it was rather about how we can promote NBS in municipalities, in inhabited areas, how we can solve problems of municipalities with NBS. So this was the main focus, but it is not possible to stop, at the border of a municipality because you have the surroundings. So what we try to do when we make a project is, for instance, when we have a flooding and we are opting for water retention, then we try to have a look at the surroundings, whether there are agricultural areas who could use this water for irrigation. But this is rather on project level. For greening in agriculture, you are certainly aware that the EU gives lots of funding for farmers. It's called a single payment via the Common Agricultural Policy. And this is to maintain, in fact, the farmers and to make their livings and to compensate them. This was one of the first policies set up by the EU when the EU was funded. On the other hand, if you look at the payments in agricultural policy and the single payment, the direct payment that the farmers are getting, this is the biggest part. It makes lots of problems as well. It creates lots of problems because if you look at Italy or some on the Po or other countries, you see that we have nitrate problems. It creates problems with artificial fertilizers, and the biodiversity of former agricultural land gets lost, and the soils are degrading. And the EU realized that they have to change the support system because nobody wants to put, let's say, a forest belt next to the plot, to the agricultural land, because the payment that they receive for that is much lower than if they put, they keep it as an arable land and they put whatever cereals inside. So what happened now in the new period is that the EU changed this support, and you will get actually a bit more if you put your forest belt. So it's not really because of Hungary, but it's because of the policy changes on EU level. And we hope that this will restore and rehabilitate a bit the loss caused by agricultural policy money and funding until nowadays. But we have an expert who is very good in agriculture. If you have specific questions, it's good to send it in written form because I can connect you with him, perhaps. He is also with us today. He is very good in agriculture and is very good in water as well. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, look, we're a little bit behind schedule, but I don't want to cut off the conversation. So I'll ask maybe Morris and then Timo to ask their questions together, and then Jeremy to make a final response to those. So Morris, please, you have the floor.
Cheers, thank you very much. And thank you, Jeremy, for the presentation. You mentioned the use of sanctions as a tool. I was just wondering, could you elaborate on that a bit more? I'm just be interested to see how that might work, and particularly in such an early phase of something.
Excellent. And Timo.
I can wait with my question. It actually relates to the presentation I'm holding later, so we can take it later.
Okay,
so then Noemi, sanctions.
Yeah. In fact, this is for policy making. When you introduce a policy like waste management, it is not enough to put the different bins on the disposal of inhabitants and tell them to collect separately, but you also have to apply sanctions. Otherwise, it's up to them what they do. And it's the same with green areas, but it's perhaps not for inhabitants because inhabitants are really willing to live in green areas. And even if they are in an urban area, then they appreciate a lot green areas. It is perhaps other on the level of investors that you can do something. In Hungary, we have a so-called biological activity index that is used, which means that if you put concrete, I try to explain simply. If you put concrete on an unsealed part of land because you want to develop something, then you have to keep the green somehow. And the problem is that you don't have to keep this greening or green part in the same area, but you can do it in another area as well, which means that you can go, you know, outside the city and so on, which can create difficult situations. And there is many criticism actually in Hungary on this biological activity index, because some are trying to fulfill it with green roofs, which is not the same as you have a tree and so on. But this is one direction, for instance. Then for public utilities, for water, you certainly have separate and unified systems. In many cases, people introduce rainwater illegally in unified systems. So when you try to make them keep the water within the plot, I mean the rainwater within the plot, it is not enough to ask them, please be so kind and disconnect from the system. But then you have to tell them, okay, I give you, let's say, a rain garden. I finance you a rain garden, or I finance you, you know, a small tank where you can keep your water if you don't have enough place to make a rain garden. And in the same time, if you don't disconnect, you will get a fine. So there are many possibilities. But it's important to think about sanctions as well within the regulatory environment. Otherwise, you will only be able to reach the top 10 or 20% of the people who are conscious and have environmental awareness.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, well, I think this has provided a great basis for the discussion to follow, you know, highlighting such issues as capacity and particular issues around challenges faced by smaller municipalities, the role of education, the key role of governance and coordination, and on finance, you know, the central role in Hungary of EU investment, but also the need to find broader financing streams, and particularly to cover maintenance costs. So with that, I will thank Noemi for her intervention, and I will give the word now to my colleague Delia Sanchez, who will be steering us through session 2 on capacity building. Delia, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. First of all, hello everybody, and I'm very happy to see that so many people have joined us today. So the next session, we will be focusing on raising awareness and stressing the capacity to achieve successful implementation of nature-based solutions, as well as sustainable implementation. As Noemi has explained, first we need to raise awareness, and once we have people attention, then we need to stress their capacity at all levels, national, regional, and in particular, this project was focusing on municipal level, where is the cross-cutting point where different sectors can implement NBS. So with further delay, I would like to invite our first speaker, Anna Bruen, from Project Officer from the Sustainable Resource Management and Integrated Service Solution at ICLEI. Anna, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and I'm happy to be here. I will share my screen. So I am here, as Delia mentioned, do you see my screen now? Now you see my screen, yes? Great. So I work with ICLEI, local governments.
Anna, can you hear us? It seems like it cut it.
Of nature. You don't?
Now you're back. Sorry,
oh.
Go ahead.
Okay. I guess I see Zoom quit unexpectedly. I'm back.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm here today to share based solutions. No?
Anna, go ahead. Yes, now it seems like you are back, but it seems your connection is limited. Go ahead. It seems like you're back.
Okay, I will try again. I think also my colleague Bettina is here today, and so she may also share some resources in the chat or respond to any questions, and hopefully now my connection is stable. So in Network Nature, we are a one-stop shop where we gather resources, projects, best practices, and tools in one place to support the nature-based solutions community. And we're a network open to everyone, and you can visit us on networknature.eu. So we are funded by Horizon 2020 funds to bring together the different projects working on nature-based solutions, and with our goal to upscale and expand the use of NBS across the science, business, policy, and practice landscapes. ICLE brings to the table local governments for sustainability as our primary area of focus, but our partners on this project are APLA, who run our platform, IUCN, and then Biodiversity and Steinbeis. So we also have private sector and conservation sector within our core team. And of these projects which we bring together, we represent or we work with over 30 projects, including over 650 partners from 57 countries. And these projects are working across a variety of themes, from urban regeneration to restoration and rehabilitation. They're working on finance. They're working on ecosystem restoration. And then in addition to the project work that they're doing, they come together through NBS cluster task forces. So we have 5 working task force groups that look at data and knowledge sharing, integrated assessment frameworks, business and finance mechanisms for NBS, communication related to NBS, and co-creation and governance. And so each of these task forces also has outcomes within the Network Nature project. And I will share a few of those resources coming out of these task forces today. And when Network Nature talks about the NBS community, we're talking about policy and urban planners. We're also talking about public and private landowners. We're talking about finance institutions and the general public. So we really are here for practitioners, policymakers, businesses, and researchers. And one of the ways that we are working with these different target audiences is specifically through the establishment of nature-based solution hubs. So we're working with partners to establish NBS hubs either within a member state or across multiple member states in a European region to really look at what are the unique nuances on the ground, so to say, to address and build relationships across the local, regional, national level, to address specific policy barriers and opportunities, and to create these long-lasting structures that are needed for NBS uptake. So currently we're working with partners in Hungary, in Portugal, in the Nordic region, and in the Mediterranean region. And so
Anna,
we should, yes.
Sorry, the slides are not changing.
They are not changing. You do not see my changing slides.
And in the meantime, yeah, well, I am also aware of the Hungarian hub.
Great.
Yeah.
Are they changing now? We did a test, even the
No.
best tests.
No.
No. I see them changing.
Perhaps you can relaunch.
I could share. Yes, I can relaunch. I can stop sharing. I will stop sharing and try resharing. Try again. Do you see my screen?
Yes, just it's coming. It says double click to enter full screen mode.
Okay, so I think Ines will be sharing your slides. Anna, if that works for you, so you just need to tell her when to move to the next slide.
Okay.
Would
Thank
that
you.
work for you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Thank you for that. Apologies. So I was on the, you can move ahead a couple of slides to the NBS hubs. This is where I left off, I believe, and we can, so I was just saying we are working to launch 4 hubs, 2 in member states and 2 across European regions. Another area, so we can go on to the next slide, another resource that I wanted to share with you, if you don't already know about it, is the Nature for Cities platform, which is a partner or sister project, I would say, for Network Nature, where you can go onto this platform and get knowledge and inspiration about what the right NBS project might be to address your city's needs or trends. And you can discover and explore different NBS solutions. You can also get information on how do you assess the effectiveness of this project from an environmental, socioeconomic, and from the urban benefit perspective. And you can also get skills and knowledge to implement your project. So it addresses some of these capacity issues from the technical side, as well as the regulatory inspiration ideas side, including suitable business governance and financing models. And then a third capacity building resource I wanted to share with you, if you could go on to the next slide, please, is the Urban by Nature program. I think the slide, one more slide. Yes, this one, thank you. This is a knowledge and expertise sharing and capacity building program that's a facilitated step-by-step process to help local governments plan nature-based solutions in cities. And it's aligned with the ISO 37101 standard. It's also flexible and adaptable to questions and to the expertise of participants. So there's some basic training videos and webinars that are shared through the program, but then there's a co-creative process that also takes place to work with the local experts in the region or in the area to then tailor and develop specific knowledge and expertise where it's really needed. And then if you go on to the next slide, to this, I wanted to share one example in talking about co-creation of nature-based solutions. The City of Edinburgh is a great example of really working across multi-stakeholders. They have design standards that help the City Council make decisions for new developments of every scale. They also have a pledge that citizens can make on their website. And they have developed an integrated approach to nature and biodiversity projects within their city based on their biodiversity action plan that's also connected to their climate change adaptation plan. That includes not only the City of Edinburgh, but the stakeholders in the surrounding area from the universities and from conservation organizations as well. So I just wanted to highlight one example there. And we can move ahead to a few resources. We can go ahead and skip this slide, being conscious of time. And we can also skip this one, being conscious of time. So one resource I wanted to share is if it was a recently published Nature Positive Economy publication, looking at what does a nature positive economy need to be inclusive of nature-based solutions. So they call for standards, both international and European. They call for measurement and valuation of natural capital, recording across value chains, both monetary and non-monetary, and focusing on public policy, the need to integrate public policy, the need to integrate NBS into policy fields. And then, of course, as was mentioned and is a topic for today, is investment in NBS, both by the public and private sector, increased market development, and this awareness and capacity building targeted to specific stakeholder groups, which is key. I think not all of the information is showing on the slides that you have, so we'll make sure that when we share these slides online that you have all of the information. You can skip ahead, or maybe I try sharing my screen again. But another slide that I wanted to share is the NBS handbook for practitioners. I will try sharing mine again. Let's see if it works. Thank you all for your patience. Which is the result of a collaboration between 17 EU-funded projects and related programs. And it's a guide to develop and implement NBS and looking at monitoring and evaluation as well. So it includes an appendix of methods describing each methodology for evaluation as well as guidance. It includes key points for policymakers, and it includes a comprehensive set of indicators and methodologies. Let's see if the advancing works. This will be the test. Perhaps. Oh, okay. 1 out of 10 today. That's, and then as was mentioned in the last presentation, were challenges related to procurement. And so there is this report, which maybe many of you have seen, the public procurement of nature-based solutions, which was created in consultation with Clever Cities, that looks at the barriers to nature-based solutions in public procurement and calls for or suggests specific actions for procurers or what they can do to address these barriers. So including using pilot projects, collaborating with suppliers, considering alternative delivery routes, and rethinking tender criteria. And then again, always in each of these reports and resources is this call for exchange with other stakeholders and this capacity building, which is exactly why we're here today too. So we have many more resources on the Network Nature website, and they're accessible to everybody. You can type in keywords co-creation or policy and see what is up there. It's also you can add your own resources. So if you have recent publications or case studies, we welcome you to add to our online database. And we'll make sure that you have these links in the slides as well. And a few other resources from NBS Horizon 2020 projects. So thank you for your patience with the technology challenges. I'm glad we were able to get through the presentation, and I hope I shared something that reinforced what you already know and also shared at least one thing that you hadn't heard of before. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to the next presentations. I guess I give it back to you, Delia.
Thank you very much, Anna, for such a thoughtful and dense presentation with so many resources that can be so useful for many of us, at all levels. So I suggest that we wait at the end of all presentation if anybody has any question. So I suggest we move to Todd Bridges, Senior Research Scientist of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Todd, the floor is yours. You can start to share your screen.
Thank you. I'm having trouble with my camera this morning, but you can hear me okay? Is that
perfectly? But unfortunately, we cannot see you.
Okay, let me try to share my screen. Let me see. Let me try again. Sorry. Okay. Just some delays. Are you seeing the slides?
It's perfect. Go ahead.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll continue the theme here of nature-based solutions in the context of our program within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that we call Engineering with Nature. And in respect to developing capacity, one of the lessons that we continue to rely on is to share information about the scope of our challenges. And in this slide, I hope you're seeing that I've titled The Multi-Hazard World. We have a lot of challenges in modern society in the world today, from human-caused disasters such as industrial accidents to so-called natural hazards related to weather and climate. In the United States, we have had more than 310 weather or climate-related disasters since 1980 that have produced at least $1 billion in damage economically. And if you sum the total damages across those 310 events since 1980, the economic damage is $2 trillion. $2 trillion of damage caused by weather. In addition to that, 14,000 people in the United States have been killed by weather since 1980. So the challenge is significant. How can we leverage infrastructure or develop infrastructure to include nature-based solutions to reduce these risks. We started the Engineering with Nature program within the Army Corps of Engineers in 2010, so this is year 12, and it includes a whole range of activities from research and development and communication and knowledge sharing to really supporting full-scale implementation of nature-based solutions. When we started this initiative in 2010, the term nature-based solutions had not yet been invented. But as you can see by our definition here, we are working to align natural and engineering processes, and that's really at the heart of nature-based solutions. And in respect to talking about this subject, we've already covered definitions, but I try always to share a simple example of what is a nature-based solution. And this is a shorthand definition that I've listed here, that we're conserving or restoring or in fact engineering nature for the benefit of people and nature. And I use as an example trees as infrastructure. Trees can provide all sorts of functions and services that we can compare to engineering functions and services, including cooling, shaded surfaces, or through evapotranspiration, actually reducing heat loss from buildings in the winter, or support to air quality and healthy hydrology, a whole range of services that trees provide that allow us, I think, liken trees in their use to infrastructure. But on to nature-based solutions in the more formal sense. This example here of the YOLO bypass, which is in Sacramento, California, the state capital of California, is perhaps the oldest nature-based solution in the United States. The project began in the year 1911, and the first structure built in this nature-based solution, which you see in the upper right, the Sacramento Weir, was built in 1916. And what this structure does is it diverts high flows, flood flows off of the Sacramento River onto a landscape, which you can see in the map there, that includes 59,000 acres of land. 59,000 acres of land. 75% of that land is privately owned, and it is inundated or flooded, if you will, purposefully during high flows through easements or through arrangements, contracts, if you will, with private landowners. But 16,000 acres of that land is included in the lower left, what's called the YOLO Bypass Wildlife Area. This is a restored environment that includes an extensive network of wetlands that's supporting an abundance of wildlife. I was out at that site just this past December on a weekday morning, on a Thursday morning, and there were many people out there that morning birding during migration on the Pacific Flyway. It's a beautiful sight. On the other extreme, I visited this project just a couple of months ago in the area of Phoenix, Arizona, and it's a managed groundwater recharge or aquifer recharge site. So the city purchased 100 acres of land, built 7 ponds that receive up to 10 million gallons, up to 10 million gallons a day of wastewater from the water treatment plant of the city. And the purpose is to infiltrate that water into the groundwater beneath the site. This project has operated for 20 years, and their estimate is that they have raised the groundwater table by 30 to 40 feet underneath this site over that period of time. And this site was designed and developed as a park. It's a beautiful space that the community can access. While it's providing this vital engineering function of conserving water, it provides a place for the community to engage with nature and to enjoy open space. Just a little over 3 weeks ago, President Biden issued a new executive order on Earth Day, in fact, and Section 4 of this executive order I've highlighted here is focused entirely on nature-based solutions. the title of this section 4 of the executive order is Deploying Nature-Based Solutions to Tackle Climate Change and Enhance Resilience. And I would invite your attention to this order and the activities that are underway now for us within the federal government to organize ourselves and our actions and activities and to coordinate those to be able to accelerate the implementation of these solutions within the country. One of the things that we've been doing with Engineering with Nature, and I think is important for all of us, which has already been referenced this morning, is to spark conversation, to start conversation and thinking and new ideas. And we've done this in a variety of means, including publishing a number of books, which can be accessed free on our website, to share what these kinds of projects look like and around the world. Investment in websites that we've already seen this morning. We started an Engineering with Nature podcast that you can access on Apple or wherever you get your podcast. And over 30 episodes we've produced so far. We've had 16,000 downloads of those podcasts, all designed to, again, start conversation and thinking about nature-based solutions. I started travel blogging this past summer, so we have a travel blog section we call Engineering on the Road, visiting projects and talking with people about the relationship between humans and engineering and nature. We've also started a policy research project more than a year ago, and this focuses on a very important element of nature-based solutions, and that is how do we understand and capture the benefits that are being produced, whether in economic, environmental, or social terms. And we're applying more modern, if you will, approaches to evaluating and analyzing the benefits of nature-based solutions within the context of our infrastructure projects in the Corps of Engineers. We're going to be sharing the results of this policy research in September of this year at a national summit or symposium in Washington, D.C. And of course, we will be sharing those results through our website as well. It's very important for us to make progress on how we analyze benefits so that we can use that information as a part of our investment decisions, whether at the national or at the local level. Another key element to progress is demonstration projects of piloting, of sharing experience implementing nature-based solutions. And this is one example where we've been working for several years along the coast of New Jersey in the Northeast Atlantic coast. And a group of organizations across national and state and local government, across government and the private sector have come together to build really first of their kind projects in the Back Bay region of New Jersey. Nature-based solutions that are being developed. And this experience of different organizations at different levels working together is really important to be able to build momentum and further progress. It's already been referenced, I think, also multiple times this morning, but it's, I think, also important for us to recognize the human dimension of nature-based solutions and the science showing the strong relationship between exposure or experience with nature to human well-being, whether physical health or mental health. That science has really exploded over the last 20 years. There are so many examples that show our dependence personally on nature, and sharing this information and making ourselves aware of it collectively, I think will help promote the use of nature-based solutions. Guidance is needed, technical guidance. How do we build these projects? And in September of 2021, we published the results of a 5-year effort, a 1,000-page technical guideline on how to use what are called here natural and nature-based features to support flood risk management. We cover both applications for river systems as well as coastal systems. More than 70 organizations around the world and more than 170 authors and contributors joined in this effort to share information about practice and to condense or coalesce that information into the form of a guide to help practitioners implement these kinds of approaches for flood risk management. And you can access this guide and download it again from the website. This is the last slide. This point has also been made that there's a whole spectrum of opportunity here, from ideas related to kind of wild, free-flowing nature to the other end of the spectrum, the attempt to use conventional engineering to somehow tame or control nature, conquer it in some fashion, which has never really worked out so well. But another way of thinking about it is kind of from the green to the gray. But there's a vast area in between where we integrate nature-based and conventional engineering. And the first point here, we need to make sure that when we communicate about these ideas that we don't present nature-based and conventional as an either-or proposition. It should always, I think, be thought of as an and. It's nature-based and conventional engineering. And if you want to think of this in terms of a simple equation I've listed in the middle on the bottom, we need to find the space where we're conserving the nature that we have, combining that with engineered nature-based solutions, and combining that with engineered structures or conventional engineering. It's the combination of these three and seeking the right balance between these three components that is going to deliver the lasting, sustainable, resilient systems that we seek. So with that, I conclude. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Todd, for your presentation and for the key points that you have highlighted in relation to start the conversation, how the decision needs to be based on data, the need for piloting, and so many guidance that you have created. So thank you very much for your presentation, and of course your comment on nature-based solution and great infrastructure. It's the combination of both that provide all type of services. So without further delay, Timo, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try and start sharing my screen. Share, and I'll try to move it one time. So that works.
Perfect.
Right. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you, OECD, for inviting Sweden and the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency to briefly reflect on our work with nature-based solutions here at this workshop. My name is Timo Persson, and I work as a climate adaptation coordinator at the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency. And more specifically, so I've managed the development of Sweden's first national guidelines on working with nature-based solutions. And I will guide you briefly through Sweden's work with NBS, our guideline, some of the financial instruments that we have in place, and also share some reflections on the key obstacles that we need to address to further implement nature-based solutions that I think are pretty universal, and many of you will see the same things. But without further ado, I'll start. So Sweden's journey with nature-based solutions, it has actually started pretty early. We've been working with nature-based solutions for quite some time, with projects such as the Augustenborg Eco-City project in Malmö Municipality, south of Sweden, reaching as far back as 1998. But although, of course, if you look at it that way, working with urban greenery to address climate change wasn't called nature-based solutions back then. But more formally, our work with nature-based solutions mainly stems from our engagement and our work with international institutions such as the IPCC, the IPBES, CBD, and IUCN, all which highlights the importance of working with nature-based solutions to tackle climate change. And this has then trickled down to our national agencies, which has started to work with nature-based solutions more and more. And the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency also has decided on a specific goal to support the implementation of nature-based solutions in Sweden, which of course we coordinate with other important agencies such as the National Board of Housing and Building and Planning. But we also saw working with the development of our guidelines as particularly important in this moment of time, as there's a new regulation saying that Swedish municipalities have to work with adaptation, but then they have the opportunity to choose between grey and green infrastructure or nature-based solutions. So we thought that it would be really important to come out with guidelines right now. And so we did during 2019 and 21. We developed Sweden's first national guidelines on nature-based solutions to tackle the effects of climate change. And this guideline, it includes a scene setter of how and why it's so important to work with nature-based solutions, a definition of what MBS are, and also what's not a nature-based solution, with safeguards, with steps that you have to reach for it to be called a nature-based solution. And the main part of the guideline consists of a stepwise guide on how to implement nature-based solutions. I will show it on the next slide, and that is followed by concrete examples of different MBS projects from all over Sweden, from urban areas, agricultural, forestry, and coastal areas. And this was particularly important for the Swedish municipalities to see actual and concrete projects that has been working out for them to feel inspired. And then there's also a guide for municipalities and project owners on the available funding for working with MBS. So here you can see the 6 steps that the guide is built upon. And for anyone who has worked basically in a project, any project form will recognize these steps. But here they are filled with information and knowledge for municipalities to know how and when nature-based solutions could be implemented. And starting by identifying where the climate risk might occur, understanding why it occurs there and the site-specific context, identifying the suitable solutions for the problem at hand. It might be gray, it might be green, and then prioritizing between them. And that was an important step for Sweden, because we saw that a lot of MBS projects don't evaluate the full potential of the multiple benefits that a nature-based solution can provide. And if you don't do that, you don't have the whole calculation of how well they will perform and how much money you will get back on your investment. And then there's the implementation phase, of course, and then monitoring, manage, and evaluating the project. And on this slide, I just wanted to show the illustration of the multifunctionality of nature-based solutions, and by highlighting and visualizing the benefits of MBS in this way, we can also create a clear argument of the cost of effectiveness of these types of solutions. And this guideline has helped us a lot to engage the municipalities in working with MBS. And in Sweden, there are quite a few measures for available funding for municipalities that want to engage in nature-based solutions. We have 2 local environmental investment programs, one for more limnic or water related projects, such as river restorations, and the Luna, which is more for maybe wetland restoration and stuff like that. And then, of course, there's LIFE, EU's funding investment body for environment and climate action. And it holds quite a large opportunity for working with MBS. But it usually takes a few municipalities together to make it work. And then European Union Regional Development Fund, which is also for bigger projects, but there are some examples of that in Sweden as well. And then there's a state grant for national disaster, which is basically aimed at climate adaptation in Sweden, which could also be applied for if you want to work with MBS. And then some country and ministry boards also have support. Yes, that was a little bit about the funding, and I'll jump forward to one of the last slides, but I think it's really important given the context of the previous speakers. So we have started to work with MBS now in Sweden more effectively, but there are, of course, a few obstacles that needs to be tackled in order to enhance the implementation of MBS. And I think they're, as I mentioned before, I think they're quite universal. And one of the main ones is the knowledge gap concerning concrete and countable data on how well these measures will actually work and to address a specific challenge, and also how well they will do and cost over time. And I think some previous speakers was talking about that as well. And we also have seen that technical manuals, as like for construction and risk calculations, they're also lacking when it comes to MBS in schools and universities. And the path dependency and silo thinking in municipalities is also a big concern. And there's a far greater need, we think, to work with the integration and cooperation between different expertise in the municipalities in Sweden. And there's also some legal and policy challenges that hinders the full potential of MBS in Sweden. There's no clear jurisdiction surrounding MBS, but I won't dig into that because it's very country specific. And of course, there's also a conflict between interests of densification of our urban areas to maximize space use and profit, and to reduce CO2 emissions by denser planning. But this, of course, comes at the cost of urban green space, basically. We see that trend a lot in Sweden. And then we have financing and financing models, because some of the grants for MBS or for climate adaptation in Sweden, it's always the most provenly effective and cost-effective solution that will get funding, and that makes it hard sometimes for MBS to get funded, as this project sometimes lack the specific information on effectiveness over time or a proper cost-effective analysis that indeed takes all the benefits that a nature-based solution would provide and put it in the same model. And you just and if you don't do that, you don't, like I said before, you don't have the whole picture. And we're trying to tackle this with more research surrounding these areas, addressing these issues in our guideline, of course. And also we have had a lot of specific seminars and lectures and campaigns directed specifically to our municipalities to address these issues. And indeed, now there are quite some projects that are popping up with MBS in Sweden. So we see more and more of this, and this picture shows some relevant projects that is happening right now. But with that, I think my 8 minutes are over, and I would like to thank you for listening, and I hope it gave some insights from working with MBS in a Swedish perspective. And also, our guideline will be available in English in just a couple of weeks now, so I'll make sure that it's put up on the main site, so you can have a look at it and how Sweden works with these projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Timo, for presenting the state of play of MBS in Sweden. It's been very interesting, and we look forward to read the guidelines. And as you can see already in the chat, there are more questions on this guideline. So Michael, if you agree, we can open the floor for questions. So maybe we can start with the question on the chat, Timo. So Tyrios, do you want to ask your question, or do you prefer that I read from the chat?
Yes. Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Timo, for the presentation. So my question is if the guidelines or your assessments include some particular resilience metrics which can help the quantification of these solutions in respect with the benefits of building resilience, and in this way to support decision making.
Yes, they do. And if I had more time, I would dig into step 4, which is about prioritization, because there we have some Swedish models on how to evaluate and how to make a cost analysis of all the ecosystem services that nature-based solutions might provide. And by that model, you will have a more clear picture of all the benefits that a nature-based solution could provide. And with we've done a Swedish model that is based on international models for ecosystem services evaluation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Timo, for your answer. You make us even more excited to read the guidelines as soon as they are published. Is there any other question does anybody in the audience has any other question for any of the speakers? It can be to Anna, to Todd, to Timo. Noemi, please go ahead.
Thanks. I have a question to the U.S. Army Corps, to Todd. When I was searching for NBS in the US, I always found the low impact development term. But I see in your presentation the term NBS, and whether there is a difference between the two, or how do you use these two terms? And if you don't mind, I would like to connect you with our National Water Directorate, because I see that you are in larger investments with lots of engineering, and they are also very keen on engineering. And this is my, my experience with engineers, that they are very much interested in large and big projects where you make something really visible. Well, I don't know how much time you have, but I think it would be interesting to exchange some experience with them. Thanks.
Yeah, that's certainly, I'd be happy to talk with your colleagues about this. It's, the engineering culture is a culture that we need to engage in making progress and innovating in this space. But really, all functional areas have a role in innovation, including, as has been discussed already today, regulators and those who control budgets, including economists and others. But on your point, I think you made it previously, there's such a lot of terminology. And low impact development is a term that has been used in the United States, primarily focused on stormwater management. So an example of low impact development would be the use of pervious surfaces, right, to enable infiltration as opposed to collection into stormwater systems. So stormwater management obviously has a relationship to flood risk management. So there's a, yeah, we could probably publish an entire dictionary on terms and their relationships to each other. I think LID is a type of a nature-based solution, but a pervious asphalt surface doesn't have much nature in it, right? It simply allows for the infiltration of water, but it is something that can be incorporated into a larger system that we might recognize more as nature-based.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see there is another question in the chat. I would say it's the last question for this session, and then we move to the next session. So I don't know who is the author of the question. Guy Bondit, do you want to ask your question directly?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so my question was just around natural capital brokerage hubs, or maybe like natural capital markets, and sort of if those are being considered already, like what kinds of architecture have you imagined that playing in, brokering natural capital based solutions?
Does any of the speaker, Anna, Timo, want to answer, or we could keep it for the other section coming? Maybe any of you?
I don't think I have a good answer for that one. Sorry, or at least I had to think about it for a while. Yeah,
maybe I'll just say briefly, there is a lot of interest in what here we call P3s, public-private partnerships. And I think this is a very exciting and hopeful area of work, especially for projects like nature-based solutions, where there is at least the potential for such diversification of benefits in the context of ecosystem services, but it's an area in my sense that is in its infancy, where more concentrated focus and more dialogue between the world of finance and the world of engineering and the world of regulation would benefit. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would just add to that by saying this is one area where we're seeing a need for this capacity development to combine the financing and access to capital and market development with the work that we're doing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just one thing. I think we don't have very good experience with PPPs, the 3 Ps, because if you do something together with a big company, then even if you are a ministry or you are, I don't know, a big municipality, the company will have more money to pay for the lawyers and so on. So it is not really working. The EU is, well, there are different experiences, but the EU is also trying to do that. What I wanted to say on financing and financial markets and so on, there are countries where I have heard that people are willing to pay for looking at a green space or a green roof from their window. I think that due to the many policies that are involved, there is some room to develop this part. And there can be also some direct benefits when, for instance, you think about a cafe or a restaurant, they could maintain the green space in front of them if they get a green space from the municipality. So in certain cases, we will certainly find some possibilities, but at the moment, I think that everybody is rather applying for public funds, obviously in Sweden and in countries where you have where you are better off. This works without large support, but in other countries, I don't think that you can introduce this NBS solutions without financial support. Thanks.
Thank you, Noemi. Let's not jump ahead because we have a whole session on financing. So I would say that we move to the next session on strengthening multi-level governance. So Tadashi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dalia, and welcome everyone. My name is Tadashi Matsumoto. I'm from the City Division of the OECD, and my team on Sustainable Urban Development, and also my colleague Rihanna Romano's team on water governance and circular economy are helping this project together with our OECD Environment Directorate. So I'm very happy to moderate this session. I hope you are hearing me well. Yeah, okay, great, thank you. So the topic of the session is about strengthening multi-level governance and regulation for NBS. So little introduction here. So although the use of NBS is often highlighted in national strategies and plans, this does not always translate into concrete action. So one of the things that can help is the existence of conducive regulatory framework and a governance arrangement. So regulatory and governance reform are necessary to overcome the lack of systemic consideration and create an enabling environment for NBS. So in many countries, regulatory incentives are used to promote the implementation of NBS. For example, we have been discussing extensively in a workshop in Hungary, an option to adjust building codes or zoning plans to encourage water retention rather than just emphasizing drainage. So sector-specific regulations and technical standards have a huge potential to facilitate the use of NBS. in key areas like land use, buildings, and also water management. With regard to governance, in many countries, responsibilities and competencies for NBS are fragmented across ministries, which is a major obstacle to the widespread adoption of NBS at the local level. So that's why it's vital to think about a framework that defines role and responsibilities of relevant ministries, agencies, and other public sectors to promote NBS at the local level, and then also as well as creating interministerial coordination to exchange information, ensure coherence, and create synergies. So this session, we have two questions for discussion. The first one is, how can national and subnational governments cooperate in the development of regulatory frameworks? Second, how can policy alignment and coordination between different national and local governments be enhanced to encourage the uptake of NBS? So let me introduce now, welcome two distinguished experts who will present their good practices to strengthen the multi-level regulatory framework to consider NBS on an equal basis to conventional infrastructure investment. The first speaker of the session is Gonzalo de la Camara, Director, IE Center on Water and Climate Adaptation. Gonzalo, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tadashi, and I'm very glad that I'm very thankful that you have me for this event. Right, so addressing the questions that you posed, I would like to mention that as it's been promoted now for more than 10 years by the Water Governance Program of the OECD, I feel that we definitely need to enrich the idea of governance. Governance is not anymore, and like common wisdom, an issue just of transparency, accountability, integrity, and meaningful stakeholder engagement. And it's not even if I perfectly share everything that you said, Tadashi, but it's not just about having like an optimal institutional setup. So a good definition of legal powers, etc. I feel that we need to go slightly beyond that and show that governance is very much about mastering complexity, embracing complexity. And this idea is about redesigning incentives. It has to do very much with creating the enabling factors for the uptake of innovations. And it's very often the case that we discuss technical innovations, but we also need financial, institutional, and social innovations. It's also very much about the right horizontal and vertical policy coordination that you addressed as part of your questions as well. And I feel that it's also about having right strategic financial frameworks. And so if I mention this, it's because I feel that governance is not just about having the right person doing the right thing, but it's very much about being able to embrace this complexity. When you look at the difficulties that we see for the upscale of nature-based solutions in cities, I work in more than 80 countries. So I've learned three basic things about these problems in terms of upscaling. The first one is that problems definitely reach struggle to reach operational scale and start implementations, and many of the times impediments possibly include insufficient resources, but also a lack of trust between different actors, and also like what we call or what the financial sector would call the bankability of projects. Why? Because there's been so much trust on grants that it's difficult for these projects to develop their own project finance and to be able to develop feasible business plans, of course, aimed at the general interest. Yeah. The second point is that it's very often the case that nature-based solutions in cities tend to be community-led initiatives that provide very broad socioeconomic and environmental benefits, but these are provided at a very small scale. So it's very often the case that we see a nature-based solution working at a living lab or working at a demo site, not beyond that, And therefore, it's difficult if they do not show that they cannot scale the impact. It's difficult for them to have the right cash flows and credit-worthy partners that they would need to prepare for a large-scale investment in its current form. And the third point that I would like to make is that despite some very positive, innovative developments, the structuring of nature-based solutions financing is underdeveloped in most countries, in most cities. And as I said before, one of the reasons from my viewpoint is that most projects still rely on grant financing, which I feel that is much needed, but it can only be the only financing source that we have. So in terms of the specific coordination between different levels of government, I would say that there are 3 or 4 areas that I would like to highlight. The first one is that it seems quite clear that sometimes we face difficulties in measuring the technical effectiveness of these nature-based solutions. And this is not just a technical drawback. It's very much that sometimes we lack the institutional capacity to respond to an impact, including human and financial capital, to design and implement the nature-based solutions on site. And let me just mention one example. I was actually part of a team with the OECD working on the water governance or the water policy dialogue with the Peruvian authorities. And when we were actually assessing the role of nature-based solutions, we realized that the country had quite a significant critical mass of nature-based solution projects, what they call natural infrastructures. But the funny thing is that when looking at those infrastructures, one of their main achievements was to be able to take those projects, those nature-based solutions, to the formal orthodox national investment plan. And therefore, they go through the same appraisal and assessment that any other infrastructure project. This is good news. Yeah, they're treated like others. The bad news is that because being treated like others imply that they're treated like physical capital assets, which is not the case, because this is very much about natural capital stocks. And therefore, it took so much time to assess these projects in the Peruvian National Investment Plan that as a result of that, many of the wetlands that were meant to be protected did dry up in the process. Yeah, so it was impossible to protect them because they were going through the same appraisal process as conventional grey infrastructure projects. So I think this is something to be fixed. Another point is we don't just fail at measuring effectiveness, we also fail at measuring cost effectiveness. And it's often the case that we are very unfair to nature-based solutions. And this deserves some further coordination between national, regional, and local authorities. Why am I saying this? Because if we use the same assessment framework for a conventional grey infrastructure project and a nature-based solutions, we are missing many of the critical benefits of nature-based solutions. One of them being that they're multifunctional, that they deliver multiple benefits. But the second one is that by definition, nature-based solutions are complex, adaptive, dynamic. So this adaptability, this modularity, this flexibility is never factored into our assessment frameworks. I think that a third major area for cooperation is that of the lack of investment. So a large part of the problem is very often the case that the benefits linked to nature-based solutions cannot be capitalized by any one party or organization. And therefore, if one benefit is being capitalized by a regional authority, another one is being capitalized by a local authority, we need them to talk, because otherwise they will never find the incentives to do the right nature-based solution program. So I feel that through addressing the positive externalities that impact on many different groups and at different scales, I think that we could create a much better social, economic, and business case for nature-based solutions. And the fourth point that I wanted to mention is that I see that there are many different lock-ins, yeah, and therefore the need for coordination at different levels is critical to unlock these lock-ins. One being institutional, yeah, so there's a very significant path dependency whereby decision makers implement solutions that are just familiar to them, Yeah, and this becomes a formidable barrier to nature-based solutions. There's also a financial lock-in. Yeah, we tend to downplay or overlook the use of other funds that in principle may seem to have nothing to do with nature-based solutions. It's like we were waiting for a dedicated ad hoc financial mechanism facility for these nature-based solutions. But as other speakers mentioned before, if we make the best out of climate finance and funds for biodiversity conservation, there are very potential synergies that could be used in order to unlock this financial lock-in. And the third one is an assessment one. As a scientist, as a researcher, I feel responsible for this one. Because as I mentioned before, we tend to use assessment frameworks that critically overlook many of the multiple benefits of nature-based solutions. Therefore, it's not that the nature-based solution is not good enough, it's that we don't measure those benefits in a sound enough way. So this is essentially what I wanted to add for this first question, and I'm of course ready to interact with Rosa as well and with the audience.
Thank you, Gonzalo. So thank you for really translating, a simple question that I pose, like governance or multi-level, into with the real cases like problem upscaling, problem of cooperation, financial issues, institutional and also assessment monitoring issues. All are very valuable suggestion, I think. Now turn to the second speaker, Rosa Huertas, Director of the Innovation, Economic Development, Employment and Commerce Department, Valladolid City Council, Spain. So Rosa, welcome, and the floor is yours. I think you are using a PowerPoint.
Yes, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Yes, I am going to try to share my screen if possible. Can you see it now?
Yes, I can see it. Can you make it to a presentation mode?
I see it in a presentation mode. I don't know, there is any problem?
Not really, we see it still. Perhaps you can start with this.
Yes, maybe Rosa, if you have two screens. Do you have two screens? Because usually when you click
No, I don't.
Okay, and when you click on presentation on the bottom right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's better?
No, it didn't change anything.
Well,
unfortunately.
So can I go ahead anyway?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you for inviting the city of Valladolid to take part in this workshop. Well, I'm going to try to give you a quite practical overview about the implementation of nature-based solutions in my city, in Valladolid, focus on 3 different projects and talk about different challenges regarding the cooperation between public and private stakeholders, and also about some regulatory barriers. One of the projects I want to talk about is the INNATUR project. This is an Interreg project regarding the improvement of the urban environment in industrial areas. So this is a quite unique project because of 2 reasons. One of them is because it's focused on industrial areas. So normally when we think about nature-based solutions in the city, we don't think in industrial areas. And another interesting thing is that these projects means a cooperation between different levels of public administration and even a cross-border cooperation. In this case, between Spain and Portugal. In our case, there is a legal instrument that is a cross-border cooperation agreement that was signed almost 20 years ago between the region of Castilla y León in Spain and the northern region of Portugal in Portugal. And this is the framework for cooperation in different fields. And one of them is precisely the promotion of adaptation and climate change. So we have developed this project as a way to increase this cooperation. So this project implies different levels of administrations and cooperation, different kind of, for example, a region to region cooperation, also a city to city, because in this case, each of the regions chose a city to work together. In this case was Valladolid for Spain, and Bragança in the case of Portugal. And so we have to work with our region, but also we have to work with other cities. So you know, all the projects are complex when there are different levels of administration, but in that case, there are different levels from different countries. And also there is an additional level that is the provincial one that is there for replication in rural areas. In this case, there have been many problems. I am going to talk more about the problems than about success. I think that there has been a lack of understanding. First, from civil society, they don't understand why we are investing in green areas in an industrial area, because they say, well, people are not going to take a walk there. And even the owners of the industrial plots find it difficult to understand why we are occupying the space they prefer use for cars or trucks with green areas. So it was very, very difficult to deal with this cultural challenge. But I think that after 3 years, things are starting to change. We have carried out all the works to be done in the public space, but now some of the owners of the industrial plot are also starting to implement green areas in their facilities. And I think that in this
Rosa, sorry to interrupt you. So let's try to improve the slide once again. So are you moving the slide already? We have not seen seeing a slide changing. So
can you see it now, or it's the same?
No, it's the same. So perhaps can you close the presentation mode once now, and perhaps then share your screen again?
I am going to try to do that. Well, I'm going to try to share my...
When you are sharing screen, if you see 2 PowerPoints, please share the screen of the presentation side.
Okay. This one?
Yes, now I'm seeing the full screen. Can you try to move the screen? Sorry, move the slide.
Yes, can you see the...
Yes, perfect. Yes.
Okay. So this
Thank you very much.
Okay. So in the other project, there were also some technical problems because the materials we were using for implement the nature-based solutions were not so suitable for industrial areas. For example, the filtering pavement was not strong enough for heavy vehicles, and there are a lot of heavy vehicles in an industrial area, for example. So there were many problems, but I think that we are learning a lot with this project. And I am now in another slide. I hope you can see it. It's about the urban green up project that has been already mentioned this morning. Though this is a Horizon 2020 project, the main object is to develop a new strategy for renaturing cities through nature-based solutions and to obtain a tailored methodology to support the co-development of renaturing urban areas. In this case, this is a very big project with 42 interventions in the city. In this case, there is no cooperation between the national or the regional government, but we are cooperating with other cities from other countries. So these projects means that a lot of different kinds of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions are going to be implemented, are already implemented in the city. So here there has been many problems from the legal point of view, because there is no legal framework and a specific framework for nature-based solutions in the cities. So we have to look into the urban planning plan, the general plan, but even though it's quite new in our case, it was approved in 2020, this kind of solutions are not particularly regulated, but they are not forbidden, but we don't find it easy to get support to carry them out. I put an example. If you can see this picture with, if you can see this picture with the green canopies,
yes, we see
here, okay, you see that the canopies are anchored to the facade, while the facades are private property. So we were supposed to ask all the owners for the permission. There are more than 20 or 30 buildings in that street and a lot of flats in each building. So it was really difficult, and because their meetings, there had to be held and with a special majority of people attending. But if you can see here in the picture, you see that the lights, the public lighting system, was also anchored to the facade, and there was not a need of permission for that, because lighting is considered a public service. And so we said, why is not green areas considered a public service? So with our colleague, it was that the lighting of this street was supposed to be changed in the next year. So they decided to speed up this work, and we redesigned the canopies and we put the lighting into the canopies. And so we switched to a modern system of lighting, a smart lighting system, and more innovative. And so that's why that was the way we use to make our project in accordance to the law. So it's a bit tricky, but I think that we have to be innovative, creative, and adaptive to this. And so in the end, we didn't have problems to carry this out. Another question was regarding heritage, because this street is in the city center. So in this case, it was very difficult to find the right solution to find the balance between the two interests. So what we did was to design these canopies, trying to avoid those buildings having this special protection. And also we have to deal with the regulations regarding civil protections and the fire department, because in case of a fire, for example, if they have to access to the buildings, the windows, the canopies had to be removed. So we have to develop a special protocol to take this into the design of the canopies. So the things are difficult, but we were trying to make it and to find new ways to do that. And also you can see here another intervention, that is the green facade in El Corte Inglés. El Corte Inglés is like Harrods in London or Galeries Lafayette in Paris. So in this case, we had to sign a special agreement with this company, and it was very difficult to deal with our lawyers and our controllers, because the normal environment for relations between a private company and a public administration is public procurement or a concession. And in this case, we have to draft an agreement. It was hard, but we got it in the end. So El Corte Inglés paid for more green space in this green wall, and also they carry out the works inside their building, and also they are now responsible for the maintenance. So we learn a lot of things.
Can you try to wrap up? Rosa? Can you try to wrap up?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, here I have another project more about water, but don't worry, I go directly to lesson learned. I think that it's important to take into account that the support for financing nature-based solution and as innovation is the right way to start introducing MBEs in the city. So I think if we had asked the garden and park departments to carry out this, they wouldn't have said no, because they don't feel confident enough to do different things, and they are they are afraid of failing. So I think that in our case, that was the innovation agency, the one who carried out this project. We act as transversal tool and supporter for this. I think that a strategy for nature-based solution is needed, but maybe not in the first steps. And in Spain, there is not a nature-based solution strategy at a national or a regional level. Well, there is a green infrastructure strategy, but it's not very focused on MBEs, and it's more linked to biodiversity than to climate change. But now these things are starting to change, because the Spanish government is making the renaturing urban plans mandatory to access the next generation funds regarding nature-based solutions, green areas, etc. And regarding legal framework, what is my advice or my experience is that changes are needed to promote or better support MBEs, but there is room for reinterpreter and the law, or implement it and in adaptive way, or have a special regulatory local framework for the use of innovation in the city as a control living lab. That is what we are actually carrying out. And I think that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rosa. I wanted to hear more about these real cases of how to be adaptive in terms of this reinterpreting the regulatory framework, and then also creating more collaborative framework across different actors. It's really useful, and thank you very much. So now I'm very, very sorry, but due to the time constraint, I would just propose to take one question which came from the chat, and ask two presenters if you are fine to answer this question. So the question came from UN Environment. If national governments are not active in or supportive of NBS, what can cities do? What can cities do? Well, to encourage region to city or city to city cooperation. But this is an interesting multi-level governance question too. You know, if you can try to answer, well, one solution perhaps is also, you know, creating city to city collaboration, cooperation, but also if national governments are not active, what would you do? Also try to create some multi-level collaboration from a city point of view, or Gonzalo, also from an expert point of view.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tadashi. And I think the question from UNEP is really relevant. I feel that it's very often the case that when we call for cooperation between different levels of government, we just make the appeal and we say, you know, like sticking a poster on the wall. Yeah, but sticking a poster on the wall is not making things happen. So I feel that what we actually need to do is to understand that these cooperation should be based on something that is really tangible. So I'm very much in favor of developing the right incentives. When I say the right incentives, I'm not always talking about money. I'm not always talking about financing, but we definitely need to create some symbiotic relationships. And for instance, it's very often the case that if you look at all the provisions in terms of spatial planning, yeah, which by definition are cross-cutting in terms of the different scales, or if you look at adaptation policies, which by definition need to be cross-cutting as well, or if you look at whatever has to do with, for instance, biodiversity conservation, yeah, which has to do with the global challenge, I feel that we're missing clear opportunities in not benefiting from this. The IPCC in their latest report was very clear. There are no mitigation pathways without adaptation pathways. And I still feel that climate change adaptation is the pool cousin in international discussions. So I feel that we've got an opportunity to see all the positive outcomes for climate change adaptation that are also at the same time reporting measurable benefits for ecosystem health. And for instance, when you look at the synergies and potential trade-offs between mitigation and adaptation, you realize that for whatever reason, now we have a solid roadmap and a good storytelling exercise telling us that for climate change mitigation, we need to decarbonize the economy. And this can only be done through an energy transition and the transition in the mobility of people and commodities. And now this seems to be set in stone. This seems to be accepted by the different levels of government. So why don't we actually build from the NATO-based solution community a new roadmap for climate change adaptation? And that roadmap requires an equivalent transition in water resources management and its reconnection to the territory. So I feel that if we manage to understand that many of the difficulties that we're facing in terms of water policy often have to do with the fact that it's an impact remedial approach, it's exposed, it's reactive, rather than managing risk and opportunities, I feel that we would find many fertile spaces for actual cooperation between different levels of government. So I feel, in order to address the question specifically, I feel that those levels of cooperation that you suggest, region, city cooperation, do demand the right incentives to happen. So despite whatever dysfunctionality of the legal and institutional frameworks.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Rosa, just a very brief comment.
No, not more comment. Well, on my side, I speaking from the ground, I think that it's easier to work city to city because it is easier to understand the understanding between ourselves because we have the same necessities. And I feel that, for example, at a state, a national level, things are always going to be slower because it's very difficult to move that. And I'm going to be very honest here. And I think they are far away from what happens on the streets and what our neighbors are asking us to do. And so we have to deal with people on the streets. So I go out of my office and I see the people and I see what they say and what are they asking me. And so I cannot wait for the government to launch a strategy to carry out a very high participatory process, because I take participatory process every day on the streets. So
thank you very much.
That's my point of view.
No, the real and very important insight. Thank you. Thank you. And with that, I close this interesting session. Thank you very much for all the participation. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Tadashi. And thanks to all of the speakers and the moderators. I think this has been an extremely rich discussion. So now we come into the final session, session 4, on leveraging and unlocking finance for the implementation and maintenance of NBS. I think we've touched upon some of these issues already in the preceding discussion, but now we've got a great set of speakers here to really talk about, what financially sustainable models can be found, not only to establish nature-based solutions, but also to ensure their continued operation and maintenance. And related to that, looking at the opportunities for securing other broader sources of finance to make investments that we know on a social level make sense, but sometimes forming the business case remains difficult. So with that, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Rachel Morrison, from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, to talk about some of the work that they've been doing to create financing models for Greater Manchester. Rachel, please.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Oh, perfect, great. I'll just try to share my slides for a moment and then get started. Okay, is that looking all right for everyone?
It's on the, okay. Yeah. It was on the presenter view.
That one?
No, try F5.
No luck on that one, I'm afraid.
Okay, look, in that case, why don't you just get started and then Ines can show the slides for you.
Okay. All right, everyone. So hi, I'm Rachel Morrison from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, which is a city region authority for Manchester in Northwest England. And I'm going to start by sort of just providing a bit of an intro into Greater Manchester and then digging into what we've been working on in terms of investment in nature-based solution. So Greater Manchester is kind of home to more than 2.8 million people. It's got an economy bigger than that of sort of Wales and Northern Ireland. Famously, it was the heart of the Industrial Revolution in England in the sort of 19th and 20th century. So it's not got a very sort of green history, I suppose. And we've made a lot of progress in recent years and sort of led the way around English devolution agenda. And we wanted to build on this sort of record of delivery over the next decade. And our ambition is very much, if you flick on to the next slide, please. Oh no, that's the right one. Our ambition is very much for Greater Manchester to become sort of greener, fairer and more prosperous city region where all of our residents can have a good life. As you can see, we've got sort of 3 aims, but today I'm going to very much talk about that greener element. And if you flick on to the next slide, yeah, that's the right one. In Greater Manchester, it's really clear that climate change is one of the biggest threats that we face across the city region. And our 2021 city region strategy really sets out that this year and sort of next year needs to really be a turning point, because if we don't act now, as you guys are all more than aware, the consequences will be felt even further by sort of future generations. So we've committed to becoming a sort of carbon neutral city region by 2038, embarking on programs around decarbonisation, retrofit of housing, sustainable transport initiatives. But we also know that a certain amount of climate change is already built in, even if we meet that sort of 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees emission targets. And our greatest risk in Greater Manchester, it's often known as a very rainy city, is from increased sort of surface water flooding. So It's one of the most extreme risks already that we face, and under climate change scenarios, we think that this could increase by sort of 10 to 30% in winter precipitation by 2050. And this puts at risks, not only our citizens' properties, but also sort of schools and critical transport infrastructure as well. So sort of the safety of our urban areas. And to ensure that the city region really remains safe, we do really want to focus on delivering nature-based solutions, because that's a crucial way we can sort of achieve that climate adaptation priorities in a low carbon way. And when I'm talking about that, I'm not sure what other speakers have been talking about in this area, but I'm very much in Greater Manchester, it's about sustainable urban drainage. So rain gardens, swales, street trees, wetlands, bioretention areas, all of these things to sort of bolster the climate resilience of communities in dense urban areas by absorbing and sort of slowing the flow of rainwaters into our drainage systems, and at the same time sort of improving quality of place, and so on. So if we flick on to the next slide, please, we also know that we're really sort of facing a funding gap. So in the UK, the financing gap, sort of these natural flood management schemes, is around, in the region, we think of around 350 million. And this is part of a broader financing gap of around 56 billion of what we should be spending on sort of natural solutions to the climate and biodiversity emergency. So there's a really significant gap. And I'm sure, as we might hear from other speakers, this is sort of representative of the globally. There's also this massive finance gap with only about sort of, I think, around 1.5% of all climate finance being used to support adaptation projects. And within that 1.5%, private investment is particularly lagging behind. In Greater Manchester, the sort of scale of this gap means that we have to look beyond public finance. And I don't mean that we will be ignoring public finance or it will be slipping down the agenda. It's still really high, but we need to look at what we can do in addition to public funding to bring in more private investment and to seek sort of blended public-private investment to accelerate that investment in nature-based solutions. So that's really the challenge that we've set ourselves. And if we go on to the next slide, I'll sort of talk about how we've tried to combat this and what we're doing in this area. So what we've been doing over the last few years to try and leveraging investment is sort of set around sort of four main themes. We've been trying to sort of set out a really supportive policy environment by setting sort of direction, strategy and policy. We've tried to sort of highlight what we think are investable priorities or the most investable priorities that we're going to focus on as a sort of start of our journey in this area. We're also trying to support some of these projects and some of these ideas to become investable. So how do we actually support these projects to go forward and provide some of the right local government structures to bring together sort of blended public-private finance more frequently. So these are the sorts of things we're trying to do, but we've by no means got all of the answers, but this is what we've definitely been trying to do. So if you flick first onto sort of the next slide, I'll talk about setting their direction. So first, we've been really working on ensuring a really positive and supportive environment for investing in climate adaptation. So from around 2018, 2019, we've been trying to embed, the climate emergency and the need for climate adaptation across all of our policies. And we've been trying to do this in the way that it's not just the city region, so it's not just the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, just the organisation I work for's policy, it's that of the whole of the of different organisations in the city region. So our 5-year environment plan was produced after sort of 18 months of consultation, and it sets out commitments not only from the GMCA, but also of our key partners and actions we need of sort of from residents and from other organisations. So it's really what we've tried to achieve is a joint plan to set that sort of collaborative approach to tackling these issues across the city region, and to highlight, this is a joint endeavour and it's a public-private endeavour, and we've tried to sort of integrate the hooks around climate adaptation across all of our strategies. So it's within our sort of Greater Manchester strategy, resilience strategies, industrial strategies, and all sorts, hopefully going forward. So that's one way we've tried to sort of build a really supportive environment. If you go on to the next slide, I'll next talk about sort of developing our evidence base. So alongside developing this really sort of positive policy environment, a key part of unlocking the sort of investment for us has really been ensuring we have a really strong evidence base to promote these benefits to beneficiaries of nature-based solutions and investors. So this is essentially so we can just answer that question of what are you asking people to invest in? What are the benefits of investing in that? And we've done this tried to do this in lots of different ways to sort of answer this question, really encourage people to invest in nature-based solutions. So we created natural capital accounts, so it's seen a lot in the UK, to highlight sort of the monetary value of some of the natural areas already in Greater Manchester. We've also developed sort of open evidence bases, which provide sort of, over a sort of 1,000 evidence items on the sort of benefits of green roofs, green walls, and making them really sort of open access. So not just our own organisations and close partners to use them, but anyone can download them and use them to promote investment in nature-based solutions. So we've had sort of property companies using these as well to promote it essentially. We've also tried to map where are some of the opportunity areas in the city region. So where could ecosystem services really, where are they kind of in demand? Where should we be focusing our investment? And supported sort of live demonstration projects. So these are sort of green walls and green roofs that have been built on some of our universities, particularly the University of Salford. And they're monitoring these benefits live, and they're really great sort of seeing as believing projects where we can take investors along to, they can see it really tangibly, and we also have that data around the benefits of these. And we've tried to use all of these different things to develop that evidence base and to provide a really strong basis to really argue for investment. And that, if we go on to the next slide, really takes me on to sort of setting the investment priorities. So we've use the evidence base to help us understand all these different benefits, but which of those are we really going to pursue, and which of them can really be translated from all of these variety of benefits into opportunities that we might be able to bring forward more finance for. So we commissioned a natural capital investment plan back in sort of 2019 to really dig into where were there the sort of the regulatory levers, where were these benefits in demand, where were we most likely to get people that were willing to pay for these benefits, but not just willing, but they were also able to pay for them as well. So that really allowed us to sort of zoom in from, yeah, there's all of these benefits about nature-based solutions, but which ones are really going to help us move forward in the future. So identified sort of 3 priority areas where we felt like there was specific sort of appetite to fund projects going forward, and that was around carbon offsetting. So we have a lot of interest in local carbon offsets from some of corporates with headquarters in Greater Manchester, and these are often actually alongside sort of international carbon offsetting projects that they're already funding. There's a desire also for local carbon offsets, but which we found particularly on our peatlands and woodlands. Habitat banking, which is linked to a biodiversity net gain requirement. So this is a requirement which is become mandatory just this year in the UK, but has been sort of ramping up over the last decade. And it's a requirement on developers to not just sort of reduce their impacts, but to deliver more and to achieve this net gain in biodiversity on development sites. And that means often you have to move off-site. And so we've got potential to have habitat banks similar to the US models that you guys might have heard of, and some models across Europe that we can use to generate finance as well. And the final one is around sustainable drainage systems. So these here, we're looking more at the sort of flood risk reduction benefits. And in Northwest England, we have a bills saving charge, which you can achieve by installing a SUD on your site as well. So identify these kind of opportunities as the ones that we would kind of pilot first and take forward. And if you go on to the next slide, we've then sort of tried to support these projects to become more investable. So yeah, these are some of the stages that we've been trying to go through just quickly. So we've been sort of supporting these projects to go through sort of technical proving of the environmental outcomes. So, you know, if it's carbon, how much carbon can be sequestered? If it's the SUDS projects, what's the actual benefits to properties in these areas? And sort of modelling those cash flows and working with some of our beneficiaries on these cash flows as well. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, I'll just keep going. So these are some of the 3 models in a bit more detail, so you can see them set out there. These are the ones we're going to focus on going forward. So different ways that we're trying to bring in finance and different things that we're trying to get people to pay for. And if you flip on again, we'll just go through the last few slides. So just to give it a bit more tangibility, I want to dig into this example of SUDS a bit more. So you can see on the slide, all of the different benefits of SUDS there. So we've got water quality, we've got this bill savings that you can get on your water charge, we've got flood management benefits, and these are some of the beneficiaries that we work to identify. So we've got our water company that will pay for reduced amounts of water going into the drainage network, which helps them reduce their sort of overhead costs and increase the capacity. We've got other people who are interested in investing for the flood benefits, and the site owners which receive this bill savings. And if we flick on to the next slide, you'll kind of see how we're going to try and bring all of these different bits together. So we're trying to bring together this sort of private finance element around this bill savings. So we've got upfront investment, which is then paid back by this bill savings. And then we've also got this blended model. We've got sort of philanthropic or more public finance around these flood risk benefits as well. So lots of different ways that we're trying to bring this together. So just flick on to the next slide. You can see a little bit more detail in terms of the biodiversity net gain elements on there and the sort of market that we think is there. So this would be the creation of strategic habitat banks, which would then be paid for. So our role in this would be sort of the upfront investment and verification, which would then be paid back over time with demand. And I think that's just about towards the end of my slides, Michael. I suppose just to kind of reflect on a few challenges that we've had, some things that we've struggled in and realized we need to put in place. A lot of sort of local governance structures to bring together different sources of finance. So we set up something we call the Greater Manchester Environment Fund, which is essentially a charitable fund to help us bring together public and private investment. And also it had to have the facilities to really pay back an investor as well as a fund project. So really acting in that role. And a few other challenges I'm sure will be similar to other people around patient capital, much longer than standard commercial investment time periods, communicating and improving those benefits as well. So yeah, I think that's everything from me. I could go on for a long time, but thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. No, that's really quite an inspiring example about how some of these challenges we've been discussing over the past couple of hours can be resolved is maybe too strong a word, but certainly progress made. So thank you for that. Okay, so look, we have half an hour left and 2 speakers. So let me give the word first to Dean and then to Roy. And then if both of them can stick to around 10 minutes, that'll leave us with the final 10 minutes for Q&A. So with that, Dean, the floor is yours, please.
Great. Thanks, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you about our work in Africa and our Blue Heart of Africa initiative and the work we're doing to scale up nature-based solutions in Africa. So from Manchester to Rwanda, we go next. So one of the first things I thought I would share with you and how we think about this within WWF is working on definitional issues. Now, if you ever worked with conservation organizations, you would know that we love to spend a lot of time working out the definitions. And what we realized when it came to nature-based solutions, it was actually preventing us from really getting onto the ground and implementing what needs to be done, even though we've been doing nature-based solutions for years. And whether it's ecosystem-based adaptation or ecological infrastructure, it fundamentally still was a nature-based solution. So what we landed on within WWF, and this was the first kind of hurdle to cross, was deciding that we need to kind of use what works in your local context in terms of how you choose to define a nature-based solution. Because if you look hard enough and long enough, you probably find you were doing this at some point before the whole global buzzword around nature-based solution. So more important than the definitional aspect for us was to consider 3 really important framing aspects. And the first is, does the intervention accomplish someone else's objective? Enough that they'll actually put money behind it, right? This is really important for us because you can imagine if we approach every challenge from the perspective of the biodiversity crisis, you will lose people in the room who perhaps don't have that on top of their minds, right? The second one was, does the intervention use some sort of ecosystem or ecological approach to accomplish that objective, right? And does the intervention protect or restore nature sufficiently that it's worth investing our resources as WWF to get involved in it. And that framing aspect really helped us a lot in terms of actually moving from a discussion where we were in the weeds around definitions to moving towards figuring out what we actually need to implement on the ground. And based on that, we pulled together a little bit of a strategy to focus our efforts in Africa. And the important thing to consider here is we're working in developing economies. So it's a little bit trickier to get the right kind of resources to make things work. So we came up with 5 pillars, and I'll pull them all up. The first one is around making sure there's some kind of scientific rigor. So does the nature-based solution actually have a strong grounding in good science? This was key for us in the context in which we were trying to work. And part of the reason is because we were making a transition. We've been doing nature-based solutions for years, but at a very small scale. And if all the talk was around accelerating adaptation efforts through nature-based solutions, well, how do you do this at scale? And we found when we started asking that question, fewer and fewer people were willing to have the discussion. So we thought we needed to figure out some kind of process to work this out. So we started with the scientific rigor. And the second element is building the economic case. So once you know that it actually works from a technical perspective, are there any economic benefits to do this to solve the societal problems we're actually trying to solve? And then the third piece is around building an investment case. Now, this becomes a little bit tricky in the context of nature-based solutions from our experience. Inherently, nature-based solutions are public good. So you often find to direct private sector investment into it can be tricky. And it's quite a leap to go from the economic case to the investment case. I mean, what we've seen a lot, particularly with civil society and NGOs operating in this space, is they're pretty good at the economic case. But to make that step is actually often, the point where you need to sit in a room full of investors and say, can I have your money to make this work? And we just don't have the numbers and the data required to make that work. Certainly in Africa, where work on nature-based solutions is data deficient. So we realized we needed to work with the right kind of partners to make all of this work. So partners who bring a wide variety of skills, sometimes not necessarily in the natural environment. You tend to find everybody who thinks the same way around the table to construct these. And what we found when we did get some really good results was bringing in people who are thinking about the problem completely differently around the table actually helped us. And the last bit is looking at how we can sustain that impact. So one of the things we've seen is that you do need to treat these as really unique cases. And in the context of Africa, there was so much that needed to be done, was we needed to make sure that we built the right kind of governance mechanisms to take that forward. So that's basically our overview of what the WWF approach is around the 5 pillars. So how do we go about implementing that? Well, the first thing we did was try and find some ambitious case studies around Africa. And we looked at 3 cases. So one I'm going to talk about today is from Kigali in Rwanda. And essentially what we were trying to solve, the problem here was flood protection. There's a lot of money that would come in from World Bank to rebuild roads in and around Kigali, but nobody wanted to finance the urban wetland restoration that kind of needed to be financed. So what would happen is during wet season in Kigali, all the roads would actually flood, brand new roads would actually flood because of the wetlands not being actually financed. Even though you had a great connection here between central government and the city in terms of developing a wetland master plan for the country and for Kigali, but there still was this financing gap. The second example that we looked at was around a typical kind of the more typical nature-based solution in Kenya, coastal protection through mangroves, something I think that everybody's very familiar with and a little bit more comfortable when we talk about nature-based solutions in this space. And the third one was really around energy and water security for Lusaka in terms of restoring the Lukanga swamp, which is a swamp ecosystem, but essentially it feeds Zambia's hydropower. So Lusaka, the capital of Zambia, is actually fed from that as a tributary of the greater Zambezi system, and also crucial to water supply in the Kafue town. So that's kind of how we approach these, right? Because we knew we needed to have some really ambitious cases, and we really needed to link them to infrastructure problems. And as mentioned, in the previous slide, these cases were strong technically, so we had them assessed. by some of the best minds working on nature-based solutions and economically viable because we made sure they connected with large-scale infrastructure development. So let's go into a bit more detail on the Kigali example. So first up, just to show you what our thinking was like in the context of defining this, was for us, we approached this from a water perspective, right? So the problem here was really around flooding and drought. And this was just a framing and having a discussion with some of the government entities. And we have over here, business as usual. And if we don't do anything, what actually happens and what's actually the consequences of that for government and the people of Kigali. And then we put the middle block to show, well, with a nature-based solution, what could actually be achieved, right? Whether it's mitigation, adaptation, and how you would get down and cascade to beneficiaries. And then, of course, the more traditional gray infrastructure solutions that would typically be in place across Africa. But this was just to put a picture of how we were thinking about nature-based solutions, so we could have this conversation with many of the governments. And just to show you what that now actually looked like in the context of Rwanda. So on this little map, and you can't see it too well, but here you're looking at flood and pollution hotspots across the city of Kigali, right? And what we've done here at a very high level is look at, well, the wetland restoration, what will that actually cost? And this was really helpful in terms of having the discussion with planning with the city and with central government, who actually had a strategy to accelerate nature-based solutions, but nobody had got into this level, right? And these, are not, I wouldn't bet my house on these numbers, but they do give you some high-level kind of compass points in which direction to go, and that there is something to look at in this context. And it gave you a sense of the area and how long implementation would take. Now, crucially, and why the Rwandan example is such a great one, I've touched on this already, is that you had enabling conditions in place, both from the city side, as I've already mentioned, and government, in terms of policy, in terms of institutions that were already had this in their strategies, and were willing to take the step to make this go forward. And the constant feedback we got from a lot of the city officials and the government officials in general were, we're really keen to do this. We just don't know how to actually sequence it and go about doing it. And this is what we tried to unpack as WWF. And the next thing we had to bring into this discussion was, well, who are the beneficiaries of this? So if we had to do it, who would benefit from it, right? And what kind of amounts are we talking if they are going to benefit, right? So I've mentioned this was, in this instance, it was purely about flooding, and the challenge here was flooding. And the beneficiaries, of course, would be the households and reducing that risk, and the infrastructure that I've already mentioned. Now, what's crucial, just to touch on this slide here, although there were biodiversity benefits, we never presented this with biodiversity benefits, because part of the reason is we wanted to retain this discussion with the ministries of infrastructure and the ministries of finance. And from our own experience, every time we put the words biodiversity in there, we found we were being pigeonholed to have the discussion with the Ministry of Environment. And then when they see the kind of budgets that you're looking at, well, this is just far too much for us to handle. So we knew we needed to stay really focused on the development and infrastructure agendas to actually try and make this work at scale, right? And we approximated a kind of rate of return just to give a sense of what the beneficiaries would look like. So then the question was, how do we begin to actually finance this? And again, we needed some conceptual ideas as to how to actually do it. So nothing earth-shattering or new, but just trying to take everything that's available and make it really simple enough for governments to actually see how they would plug into this, right? And you've heard already, there's a finance gap, and you've seen it in the context of a city in Manchester in the UK, but that's across the world. We know that, and that's why we're having this discussion today. So the question for us was, how do you begin to bridge that finance gap, and what are the actual options to do it? And this is what we've tried to kind of map out. So concessional loans, commercial debt, bonds, equity, to actually do this and make sure that you can bridge that finance gap and direct this money into NBS. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on this so you can get to see how it was done in the context of Kigali. Well, not how it is done, but how we hope it will be done in the context of Kigali. But this is what we're thinking about. So very quickly, and I know we're pressed for time here, but importantly, with all the cases that I showed you, and this is just the one, but all of them do need an anchoring institution that's in government. That's the one consistent thing that came up, was that there has to be an anchoring institution that's either a parastatal or state entity to actually lead this. And then you can use a combination of public funding, grants, concessional loans to make it work. And you can have various NBS interventions, right? So the carbon credits, taxes, ecotourism, urban agriculture. And the key thing, again, to mention, and I will kind of harp on a little bit, because I think it's an important enough point, but we keep that benefit around the flood risk mitigation, because at the end of the day, it's something that the governments actually can relate to very, very simply in terms of having a discussion and making that shift to nature-based solutions. And maybe another key important point was looking at where those upfront financing could actually come from. So of course, there's the government budgets is one angle, but also then getting a little clever with how countries use their allocations from the Green Climate Fund or adaptation finance. So think about how you could use that to accelerate the implementation of large-scale nature-based solutions in your country or at city level, because often that link is not made, and this potentially GCF or GEF funds could be catalytic, or even in the case of Hungary, when I spoke to Michael, if it's EIB funds, they can all potentially be catalytic to allow you to unlock different forms, that initial upfront financing, and then you can implement these large-scale nature-based solutions. So my last slide, and just to let you know where are we going with this next. So of course we have a strong technical case, we have the economic case, we have the biodiversity benefits, even though we keep them in our back pocket. And if anyone asks, we're happy to show it to them. Our key next step, though, is to examine the detailed mechanisms to finance the cases and try to move from theory to practice. That last slide that you just saw, really diving into what do those numbers look like and who do we need to have around the table that we, with a greater deal of confidence, can actually say, well, if you're putting your money into this, this is what you could get out of it. And that's our big next step. We're also looking at understanding the institutional arrangements within Africa of how we could land this program, perhaps linked to an institution like the African Development Bank. We'll continue to engage the governments and strategic partners. We're working quite closely with the Global Center on Adaptation with this. And we're looking at exploring new avenues of finance. One of the examples we're looking at is Islamic social finance and how they could actually connect into this, because they align very much with the values of trying to promote nature-based solutions, climate change adaptation. So we're thinking if we could create a vehicle for Islamic financial institutions to engage, there's an opportunity to help accelerate adaptation efforts. And the last thing we'll do is share this at COP27, where I hope many of you will be there, and we'll hopefully have an updated progress. And I think that's pretty much it, Michael.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Dean. And I think, it's, again, another great example, and it's quite striking some of the parallels between what was discussed in the context of Manchester and the proposed approach in Kigali. So look, I don't want to eat into the final speaker's time, so I'd very much like to give the floor now to Roy.
Thank you very much, Michael. Just let me figure out how to share my screen here. There, can you see a full screen?
Perfect.
Okay, super. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Roy Brook. I'm with something called the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, which is a Canadian NGO. My hope for the next 8 or 9 minutes is to give a brief overview of natural assets management, which you can understand as a subset of nature-based solutions as a much broader umbrella category. And I think it feeds well from the last, from Dean's presentation, insofar as we through this work are emphasizing infrastructure related services and perhaps de-emphasizing biodiversity, depending on the audience. And it really, this work emerges from two broad sets of challenges. On the one hand, we all know that there is no path to net zero 2050 without a strong role for healthy, biodiverse and connected ecosystems, that nature-based solutions must be a part of this, but that most nature-based solutions are still stuck at the level of small and/or disconnected pilot projects. The other big challenge that our work emerges from is that cities, local governments in Canada, in the United States, but also far beyond, face challenges of aging infrastructure with deferred maintenance, a stock that needs renewal, and the reality that they cannot, particularly in the face of a changing climate, simply build their way out of it. And natural asset management then really kind of bridges these two sets of challenges, and it does so by providing local governments with the policies, tools, advisory services to conceptualize, understand, account for, and ultimately protect, rehabilitate, manage nature as a critical asset. So stated differently, it moves it from the peripheries of decision-making, where you're thinking of nature as a green or aesthetic benefit alone, to the center of decision-making, where you're thinking about it as a vital asset. And it does so by reframing, reconceptualizing things like forests, green spaces, riparian areas in terms of core local government services that local governments must provide anyway, such as stormwater management, aquifer recharge, drinking water filtration, as well as a range of co-benefits, many of which we've seen to be very important during the pandemic, such as health and recreation. So there's a lot in that, quite a mouthful that I've just given there. So maybe I'll unpack this with an example. Let's think of a wetland. Its biological function may be to store water, but this can translate into core services for a local government, such as flood risk reduction or drinking water filtration. However, to the extent that most local governments, and I'm speaking here of a Canadian context, but I you know, having lived and worked in quite a number of countries, I don't really think it's probably going to be vastly different anywhere else. Most local governments are not thinking about natural assets or nature in broad terms. To the extent that they are thinking about nature at all, they're thinking about it as a green or recreational or social amenity. And this raises at least three issues. First, it predisposes us to think about nature really, to put it colloquially, as a bit of a beauty pageant, as opposed to a full understanding of all of the different services that it can provide. The second thing is that it means that every hour of every day, local governments are taking land use, zoning, investment, and other decisions with, at best, a very partial understanding of the value of nature's services and the liability risks if they are to degrade those services and provide them by some other means. So they go ahead with their land use, zoning, planning decisions, understanding the financial return from those investments. They are putting, in effect, a value on nature. It just happens to be zero. And the third thing is that it means that there's a large gap between the potential of nature to provide us with services that we all rely on and how we actually act on that benefit. And the result is that in decision-making, nature gets overused and undervalued. And that picture in the bottom right-hand corner, I took maybe 5 kilometers from where I live. And it's just an example of this. The developer will go in, scrape away every living green object, and then say, okay, what services do we now need to build back? Without ever really asking the question, well, what services was nature providing there in the first place? Why do we care about any of this? Well, it depends a little bit upon one's point of view. But from a local government point of view, as I say, the existing engineered stock is aging. I know the Canadian situation best, but again, if you look at global figures, they don't range dramatically, and local governments cannot simply build their way out of this challenge. Looked at more positively, if we can get more money going in to nature-based solutions because they provide infrastructure services, this means greater sequestration, greater storage of carbon, higher resilience to physical threats from a changing climate. And some of the work that we've done also shows resilience in the sense that local or that natural assets can have a greater plasticity, if you will. They, within reason, can adapt to a changing climate, whereas your more linear infrastructure, your infrastructure like a pipe, if it's 50 millimeters, that pipe's not going to get any bigger because the weather's changing outside. Now in Canada, one of the things that is making our work possible is that local governments are moving more and more to modern structured asset management processes. In some provinces, they're being, well, in one province, they're being forced to by regulation, but in other cases, it's more really a question of sort of carrots and incentives. And these are asset management systems for engineered assets primarily, but asset management has as its central organizing principle the idea of sustainable service delivery. And what this really means is that if I'm the director of engineering or finance or public works or parks for a local government, I don't really need to be so concerned if my service is coming from a quote unquote green asset or a quote unquote gray asset, only whether or not that service is cost effective and reliable. And so to the extent that you can demonstrate that nature can provide cost-effective and reliable services or can be restored and rehabilitated to provide that, then asset management as a process can very much help us conceptualize, manage, understand nature as a critical asset. And again, make it the preoccupation of central preoccupation. Why? Because if you work for a local government, the only real reason that you're showing up to work in the morning is to provide services. And so if nature can provide these services, then you kind of have to pay attention. And I would just submit that, look, whether other countries call it asset management or not at a local government level, every local government to some extent is in the business of asset management. And this framework that you see on our screen here, although it's from something Canadian, it's based on British, Australian, and New Zealand norms and standards, which in turn are derived from ISO standards. So it does certainly have a broader applicability. So I'll come to some practical examples, but just on the methodological piece here, I'll say that in our work as a not-for-profit, when we work with local governments, we're working them through this standard asset management process with which local governments are increasingly familiar. And we work through questions like, what are your natural assets that you own, or very importantly, that you rely upon, whether or not you own them? What's their condition? What risks do they face? What are the services they provide? And typically we're thinking of services in the sense of local government services. We'll typically do detailed modeling for this so that we can do a straight comparison to engineered assets. We will do an economic valuation, not of nature. We're not saying nature is quote unquote worth a certain amount, but the services associated the value of given services to particular beneficiaries. Then we get into this planning scenario, which allows us to play with if-then variables. What happens if a forest fire takes out a quarter of my watershed? What happens if I rehabilitate it? What happens if I just leave it alone or develop the entire thing with impervious surfaces? Then the implementation stage answers the question, so what? And as you can see, it's part of an adaptive management cycle. It's not a finite A to B loop. So in Canada, this really started with one single example initiative about 4 or 5 years ago. I doubt anyone's heard of it. It's a place called Gibson's on the Sunshine Coast of British Columbia, near where I live. And they really wound together older concepts of ecological accounting, ecosystem services with the idea of asset management. They came up with what we believe to be the world's first asset management policy that really puts natural and engineered assets on the same footing, not as a big moral statement, but because they provide the same kinds of services. They started, and now the changes that they've made throughout the town range from these kind of high-level policy statements into zoning, subdivision, development charge changes, changes in human resource systems, which I obviously won't have time to get into, right down to investments. To make a very long story short, we've now, the NGO that I'm with, we grew up to really say, can this be refined, replicated, and scaled? Evidently, the answer is, at least in part, yes. At last count, we clocked over, depending on how you cut the numbers, roughly 100 local governments, all at different stages along that asset management wheel. To give two very, very quick examples of the kinds of things that sort of get yielded in practical terms. So where this all started in Gibson's, they did a side-by-side comparison. They knew they had a small development in the upper reaches of town. With a new development, you need new stormwater facilities, particularly in a flood-prone, rainy area, such as the one that I live in. And the normal default status quo course of action is simply to bang in new engineered assets, culverts and retention ponds. Instead, they did a side-by-side comparison, and they said, okay, well, what are the capital and operating expenditures for the engineered solution? It was roughly 4 million Canadian dollars plus operating costs, which a little town like Gibson's does not have without borrowing. Then they said, if we simply do works in the park, and importantly, it's not a park that they actually own, and we do some restoration, well, what's that cost? Well, it's $800,000 and it's an operating expenditure. So we don't have to borrow 4 million capital. And so that's what they've done. And they get there, so they've gone ahead with their development, and they're getting all the benefits of a restored forest, and they haven't had to come up with all these other expenditures. Another place also in British Columbia had back-to-back flooding states of emergency in 2017, 2018. We did some work with them, really sort of identified the service values of their floodplain. To make a long story short, again, they secured around 50 or 55 million in Canadian dollars. They expropriated a lot of housing and businesses in the floodplain and are restoring it to its natural state. Again, it's not a biodiversity play. It's because this is the best way to protect the downtown business area from a very rapidly changing climate. We've had, multiple states of emergency in the last year alone. So, okay, the good news in Canada is that we've worked with 100 local governments. That's also the bad news when you think that there's almost 4,000 local governments in this country, and so that barely scratches the surface. So we're also working at an enabling level, some of the things that may be of possible interest to people here. By enabling, I'm talking about professional standards, professional norms, national standards. We worked with the engineering regulator in this province. They've come out with the first professional practice guidelines, to our understanding anywhere, but correct me if I'm wrong, please, that give professional engineers guidance and direction. And again, keep in mind that this is a regulator, that when they're doing asset management, they have to consider nature alongside this. And that's an example that we now hope to replicate in other provinces and in other jurisdictions or in other disciplines. We are also working on a national standard with a national standard setter for the inventory piece of our work. So that's the first gateway to this work. By this time next year, we'll have a national standard out for that. That should, in effect, open up the market so that any engineering consulting firm can go work with a local government, but not in some rapid race to the bottom where everyone's just trying to cash in on nature-based solutions, but according to some agreed upon norms. I would say Canadian work, in my view anyway, is in its infancy in terms of the role for capital markets and natural asset management, but we are beginning a project in this area to really look at practical needs in watersheds that for acquisition, restoration, rehabilitation, and different funding mechanisms that could help meet those needs, because it is very clear the federal government's come out with a lot of money for this, but it's a lot of money only viewed through one lens. It's 200 million over 3 years, which is, again, great, but minuscule in comparison to the needs. Also some work going on with the Public Sector Accounting Board, but maybe I'll stop there in view of the time. Thank you, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Excellent, thanks, Roy. Look, just speaking for myself, I found this discussion extremely inspiring. And I think partly in terms of understanding the interlinked nature of the challenges in terms of capacity, governance, and finance, but also looked at more positively, starting to see some of these replicable approaches that can help to overcome these challenges and really unlock the progress that we need. I appreciate we're slightly over time, so I just want to firstly give a big thanks to all of the speakers, the participants, the moderators. A 3-hour virtual conference is a lot of concentration, and really appreciate your energy and engagement. Secondly, to thank the interpreters. I don't speak Hungarian, but they did an excellent job when we were in Budapest a few weeks ago, helping us participate in the discussions there, and likewise today. And for the organizing team, so my colleague Delia, David Munka, and Brooke Demchuk, for bringing today's events together. And of course, the project partners, including Noemi and her team in Hungary, DG Reform with Leticia and colleagues, and of course the Hungarian experts. So look, I think this has been a really great discussion, but it's clearly only part of the journey. So we very much look forward to continuing this dialogue with you. We will be putting all the materials up on the website, including the contact details, presentations, the recording, and links to relevant materials. If you have anything you wish to share, just shoot us an email and we can add that to the link. And we wish all of you a very pleasant morning, lunchtime, evening, as the case may be. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.